early texts in Genesis where it talks about human beings have dominion over the earth, right? The dominion, and if you read Pope Francis, he's very clear about this, and it's not limited to Catholicism, but he says it doesn't mean domination, right? Dominion, if you look at it, actually means caring for.
My guest today, Dr. Janet Rumfelt, is just this remarkable individual with immense humanity and a deep concern for the world in general. The mindset and the heart that she brings to her work as a professor of environmental humanities and in her work as an animal welfare activist is truly informed by this very wise and holistic approach. Now, knowing that she needed to live a life full of meaning, Janet kicked off her career and her education long ago by getting a doctorate in philosophy, religion, and ethics, which of course deepens her approach to everything, including animal welfare and environmental conservation. Now, in today's episode, Janet shares a spiritual, philosophical, and really even religious basis for protecting the earth and the human and non-human animals who live here. She strengthens her perspective by sharing how Pope Francis, the late Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, as well as indigenous people around the world, all espouse this critical connection between the earth, humans, and animals. Now, if you want to change the world, I think you'll be inspired by how this woman made doing just that her life's work. So here is my conversation with Dr. Janet Rumfelt. Dr. Janet Rumfelt, hi, and welcome to How We Change the World.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really delighted to be here.
Good. I'm delighted also. It's good to see you. It's good to have you on the podcast. And I started this a year ago. Well, I think you're number 50. I think you're the 50th interview. And I had you on the list at the very beginning. And I'm sorry that it took so long to get to this point, because you were one of the first people who came to my mind as someone out there, trying to make a better world for everyone and, all the animals and the environment and everything. So thank you so much. I really feel honored to have you here. I
also feel honored to be here.
Well, thank you.
So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And I had to actually rack my brain about where we met, because I think I knew we met like a decade ago or something, only one time, but one of the benefits of social media is that you kind of get to keep up with people that you just got to meet. Otherwise, you would have lost that connection. So I have followed your work over the year, and I had to dig back. And I think where we might have met, and I think this is it, is at DU. Actually, we both worked at DU you were only there a short while, right? I didn't know that before. I worked there for 10 years, but it was at the same time. But then I think this was in 2013 or 14 when there was a film at DU shown called The Ghost in Our Machine by Joanne MacArthur, this famous, wonderful Canadian photographer who started We Animals. Is that what you remember?
That's exactly what I remember.
Good.
Yes.
I had forgotten. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we saw you afterwards too at Native Foods. And I can't remember who you're with, but I think somebody we were all with knew each other. But anyway, we had a conversation. It was lovely. And you made a big impact on me. So that's why I think I've kind of followed you along. And I knew that you were interested in animal welfare from that and from just what I see you doing all the time in the world. But I've since developed recently, as I mentioned earlier before we got on it, there's this richness that you bring to the conversation, this depth of knowledge and deep thinking, I guess, and deep concern that really imbues it with the weightiness I think these subjects deserve. Sometimes when we talk about animal rights, you can have yelling and screaming and silliness and, never really getting to the heart and the soul, or even the way, how to find our way to having respect for the environment and for one another and for animals. They're inseparable, and knowing that those things all kind of merge together. So, well, let's get you introduced first of all, because that's sort of the bottom line. And I want to start with your academic background, because really I think that informs your entire every step you take, it would appear. You got your doctorate in religion, ethics, and philosophy. Is that right?
That's correct. It's technically in religious studies, but there are different tracks you can take. And my particular track was religion, ethics, and philosophy.
Was that at Florida State?
That's at Florida State University. That's correct.
That's why you keep talking about this girls' soccer team.
That's correct. They just won the championship. So yes.
Well, congratulations.
Yes,
did you play soccer while you were there?
I did not. I'm just a fan.
Fans are most of the equation. Did you do all your studies in Florida?
I did not. Just my doctorate.
Yeah. Because are you from the South?
So I was born right outside of St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh,
but my family is Southern. So they've all gone back to the South now. So my family lives in Nashville, Tennessee, and I live there as well. And then my brother lives in Georgia.
Wait, you live in Nashville now?
No, excuse me.
Oh, you did.
I did live in Nashville. Yes. No, I live in Denver.
Yeah, I thought so. I'm like,
sorry for the confusion on that.
Well, with social media, that can happen. You could be living anywhere, and I would have no idea. But you're currently a professor at Regis University. You're the Associate Dean of Online Education. I know there was a switch there for you. I want to ask you when you went from chairing one department to doing this. So I think it was a shift in focus. You're also the board president at the Africa Network for Animal Welfare USA, which was originally the reason I wanted to talk to you about that particular organization, but my interest has grown as I get to know more about it. So I want to cover that for sure, as well as other topics. Sure. You also, you're the chair at the Ivory Free Colorado. Is that still a thing?
So we're probably going to sunset it. So that was how I came in to ANAW. To be honest, I came in by chairing that committee, and that was an initiative. Came into ANAW USA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was how I came in, and I came into that work was that I chaired that committee, and that was an initiative to get the sale of ivory products banned in the state of Colorado. It expanded out to multiple species. We were successful. We partnered with some other organizations. We were successful at getting it passed at one level, but then it got stopped at the Senate. And so it didn't get out of committee. So that's what initially happened. And then after that, there just wasn't a lot of momentum because it actually costs a lot of money to try to get an initiative passed legislatively.
I didn't know that. So that's good information to have. I wasn't going to go down this track, but I'm very curious why. So it made it through the House, the state legislature?
It made it through the House. That's correct. The state House, but it did not make it. Well, excuse me. It made it through committee, the House committee. Okay. And it did not make it through the Senate committee.
And do you know why? I'm just curious, and I don't want to go too far afield on where we're headed, but why would people in Colorado be opposed to selling the tusks or whatever or import them of I don't know, endangered species, imperiled species? What would be the argument?
Well, we tried to address some of this, but it has to do with, we tried to make exceptions for antiques, ivory piano keys, ivory handled guns that are antiques, things like that. Okay. But nevertheless, there were people who were concerned about the implications for gun ownership. And then some people felt that it just simply wasn't necessary because of the federal bans.
I see.
And yeah.
Well, so that would hold more water, I guess, although I don't know where we're at with that in the federal. That's a heavier lift, and you try to get something covered at these days. It's almost like it's not even a feasible one. But it's good to raise awareness. There's a lot of ways to do this, and the law is one, but there's certainly education is another, and so and then you also, just to continue on with some of your past or current endeavors, you're the race director, or the founder and the race director at Running Wild, the Running Wild race, which is that still a thing? I know it stopped during COVID, I think.
It stopped. Well, we actually had a virtual run in 2021. Right now, we're on a bit of a pause because we are trying to work through whether we can create an immersive virtual experience for people. So we're exploring platforms and ways in which we might be able to do that, because
what
we
is a
feel like
virtual run? Does that mean you all do it on your own?
That's correct. So
Okay.
it wouldn't be a ground, would
Yeah.
not be a ground-based run. We did a virtual run, but we didn't have an immersive experience where you had an app to go with it. And so we think that would be the most effective way of doing this. We have some great ideas about that. But creating apps costs money. And so we're trying to explore how we might be able to do that.
I know somebody who might be able to help you out. So maybe we can talk about that later.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Okay. Yeah. Well, originally, as I said, I wanted to have you on to talk primarily about the African Network for Animal Welfare. I don't think it's something that a lot of people are aware of. It's a small organization. So maybe we could begin with your role as the board chair. I know this is for the well, we're going to call it ANAW from now on, but just so people know, it's African Network for Animal Welfare, African Network for Animal. Right. So we'll call it ANAW, but you're the chair of the board for ANAW USA, which is different but connected. So, so can you just talk about your role and maybe some of the philosophy of ANAW in general and how it carries out its work?
Sure. So ANAW USA, or ANAW, we are the sister organization for ANAW in Nairobi, right? So
Kenya.
Yes, in Nairobi, Kenya, and we're connected with them, and we partner with them. But initially my role as the board chair is to help oversee the operations, to help maintain transparency, and to provide leadership along with the executive committee. Right. So I'm not doing any of that by myself. We do have a CEO, Dr. Catherine Baxter.
Yeah.
And she's on the ground every day doing the operations work. We're kind of doing it at the meta level, right? And so because we're a one-person organization, our board has to be a little more hands-on than what you might find in other organizations. Yeah. Now, that's not true of our sister organization in Kenya. They have a large staff.
Yeah.
And so the philosophy that we have is One Health, which is the notion that the welfare of people, planet, and non-human animals is intertwined. And so the work that we attempt to do is place-based to promote harmonious existence between people and non-human animals, and of course the environment. So, I like to say that what's good for animals is good for people, is good for the environment. You can't help animals or the environment without helping people. And you can say that in any way you want to say it. You can't help the environment without helping people and non-human animals, right? It's because we're interconnected and intertwined. Yeah. And so that's the kind of work that we promote. Some of that on the ground work. There's also some meta level work that has to do with, and this is our partner in Kenya. They're spearheading the work with the UN and doing some of those initiatives, what I like to think of as meta work. But our work is more focused on raising funds for those ground-based projects, and then also helping to bring over veterinarians from the U.S. and all kinds of projects that happen along those lines. But essentially, depending on the trip, the goal is to provide medicines, vaccines, treatment for dogs, cats, and donkeys. A lot of people don't know, but donkeys are working animals in Africa, and so their health is very important. And in East Africa, as everywhere, rabies is a zoonotic disease, right? And so it's very important not only to help vaccinate rabies cats and donkeys, to vaccinate dogs, cats, and donkeys against rabies for their health, for animal health, but also for people's health.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, and then I'm sorry, do you say ANAW or ANAW? ANAW. I've been saying it the wrong way the whole time. And I've heard it said, I don't know what ANAW. Okay, I'll try to stick with that. So their work in Kenya, and maybe perhaps I think there's some other places in Africa they partner with too, or but it does involve protection as well of endangered species or imperiled species, correct? Because I saw a lot about traps and unethical trapping.
So there's a desnaring project where people go out into the bush and clear it of the snares that poachers use to trap animals. ANAW also helped to employ a group of guardians in Kasigao, and Kasigao is a migration between Tsavo East and West for animals. And so that's an example of promoting what we might think of as wildlife livelihoods, right? But bringing people from the local community into those guardianships, and then they benefit from protecting the wildlife. So that's an example of that.
I heard you discussing somewhere about a study that someone did, because when you're talking about protecting wildlife in areas where people make their living from taking the lives, selling the ivory or whatever, donkey skins are apparently I hadn't been aware of that either, that's a coveted material, I guess, in China at least. Is that true? Have you seen donkey skin used or like made into something?
I haven't seen it, but it's primarily a kind of gelatin that they make, and they use it in traditional Chinese medicine, and then they also use the skins. And it's a very serious problem. It's a very serious problem. Yes, because the number of, because donkeys don't breed well in
captivity.
Well, I don't even know if captivity is the right word, because donkeys are a domesticated animal. So, but they're just slow breeders. But at any rate,
it's an issue. Yeah,
it's an issue. I'm not sure about that. I have to be honest. But what I know is the numbers of donkeys are shrinking because they're being exported to other countries, primarily China. And that affects workers on the ground, because they need those donkeys to carry out their livelihoods. And so it's a serious problem that they're being sold in that trade.
Are they being sold illegally? Is that what you're saying? Or
I don't believe it's illegal. I don't believe it's
that's
illegal.
Even harder to fight than if it's not even illegal. But is ANAW in Africa also? They are also working. Actually, before we move on to that, I just wanted to finish the thought about we were talking about how having any animals there can sometimes, for a culture, it's part of their livelihood, right? And I think you mentioned how important it is for, like, there's a study on elephants, and someone was able to demonstrate how an elephant who is alive was more valuable to them in terms of income and bringing tourism in and so forth, rather than killing them and taking their tusks and selling them. So education, it sounds like that might be a part of what they do as well, or that they value anyway.
That's right. And so part of what I think organizations attempt to do is to help people in the local community participate in the value of, in the example you just cited, in the ecotourism of elephants, right? So that's what you want to do. You want to make sure that they're benefiting from it, because elephants, as wonderful and fantastic, and I do think they are wonderful, fantastic, fascinating animals, they can be challenging to live next to.
Sure.
They can raid crops. And things like that, and it really affects community livelihoods. And so it's very, very important for organizations to help people make money by protecting them. And I'm not, I have to admit that I'm not an expert on the donkey trade.
Sure.
So I want to make that clear.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whether it is or is not illegal. I don't think it's illegal, but I'm not positive. So it's something I'd have to check on.
You don't have to be an expert in everything. You're an expert in many other things. So, but I guess what does ANAW get involved with stopping illegal poaching, or is it more of an educational and livelihood focusing, would you say?
I believe it's more educational and livelihood focused, but they do work to, advocate for legislation.
Yeah. How did you get involved in that in the first place? Like what drew you in, and how did you even meet them?
ANAW?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I got involved with them because, so in 2014, I was actually scrolling through social media, Facebook, which, rightly gets a bad rap.
Yeah,
For,
I agree.
yeah. So for all of the things that it promotes. But in this instance, I came across what was then the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust.
Say
It's
that
now
again.
the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. I came across a
Oh,
post, and they were talking about the poaching of elephants. And this is something that I thought we had resolved in the
yeah,
late 80s,
right,
early 90s, right?
right, yeah.
And so this particular incident is really the impetus for how I got involved in all of this work, because I was pretty horrified by what I was reading. And so, because what I do is research, I couldn't let it go. I had to look into it. And what I realized is that we are likely, of course, this is debated, but we are likely in the beginnings of the sixth mass animal extinction, and that we are losing species at an alarming rate. And in fact, one of the 2019, I think one of their UN reports that was issued indicated that we are on track to lose about 1 million species of flora and fauna, and some of those will be lost within decades.
Yeah.
So
It's
I
tragic.
became very,
and
very, very
shocking, because
alarmed.
it's still not very well known.
It's not. It's
Yeah,
not.
it's
And
oddly so, despite
it's
people's
oddly so.
efforts like racing extinction and other efforts. But yeah,
Yeah.
that film.
So once I started getting immersed in it, because as you know, I'm in the humanities. I'm a religious studies, scholar, but once I began to get immersed in this literature, I realized that the problem was interrelated or intertwined with the environment and people.
Yeah.
And so I just started what I realized is I couldn't sit on the sidelines. Like, I had to do something. I've been a lifelong animal lover. And I've always been a person who appreciated and enjoyed the environment. And of course, I love people. And once I realized the level of the crisis that we were in, that's when I really said, okay, Janet,
Yeah.
you've got to do something, right? So I just started putting some feelers out into the community. And what happened is a friend reached out to me about Ivory Free Colorado. And I joined the committee, and then they eventually asked me to chair it.
That just keeps happening to you.
Yeah, so that's how I got involved with ANAW USA, and eventually I just joined the board, and then joined the board at ANAW in Nairobi.
So, and when was that? Because it's not a really old organization, I don't believe, right?
No, I came into it in 2016, and then I became the board president in 2019.
That's really impressive, because this is what this whole show is about, right? It's just like, how do we change the world? And it's always, I think, the hardest thing for people. Initially, when I started this podcast, I thought we were going to focus on every person trying to help the listening audience see how they can get involved. And that's, or learn how they can get involved in something. And whatever it is, doesn't matter really what it is. Just pick your poison. There's plenty to pick from. And it has evolved more into people talking about what they do. But I'm wanting to, especially for going into the next year and starting early, focus more on how people like yourself can explain and demonstrate, like, how do you do it? How do you take action? A lot of us will do smaller things, like maybe we'll cut meat out of our diet, or we'll, do something with our living more sustainably and do different. And those are all important things to do. But then there's people who, when you see something, like you come across something so stark, like how much plastic is in the ocean, or any number of issues, as you did with imperiled species. What do you do? Most people just don't know where to start, so they don't. So you just found a way, though. You when you said you put it out to your community, if you don't mind getting a little granular about it, Like, what does that mean? Like, first of all, it helps to be part of a community. You're part of a university. You're probably engaged in a number of other things. Is that where this came from? Is you said your own community? How did you ask people? I'm getting very specific here, but put out an email.
No, it's a great question. I think the first thing that I did is exactly what you're talking about. I let colleagues know that I was concerned about this, and concerned isn't even the right word. Alarmed is the right word.
Scared.
And then, scared. And then I also, that's what also about the same time that I started the Running Wild race. I started the Running Wild race in 2015.
Yeah.
And so
something
people
you've
knew,
never done before.
Oh no, I mean,
so you figured out how. Okay, so that I'm just saying it takes some initiative. Okay, I'm going to start a race to raise money for this fund and awareness. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, it has worked. I have been a lifelong runner. Now it's a little more what I refer to as a slow jog when I run. But
slogathon would be a good term for a good way to raise money for the uninitiated. Anyway,
yeah. So I've always enjoyed running, and also I had a good community of friends that I turned to, who were also, as I shared with them some of this information, they were very interested, and we worked together as a group to start the race. So I wasn't alone.
That's lesson number one.
Lesson number one.
Reach out and get some allies. Yeah.
Get some help. And then I have to give a huge shout out to my university, Regis. They were incredibly supportive from the beginning. They allowed us to use the facilities, the grounds. They lent their resources and their marketing capabilities.
Nice.
Yeah, and
that's huge.
It's huge. And so, in a sense, before Ivory Free Colorado ever came along, before it ever came along, I was already getting involved in imperiled species and protecting them. And so, that's kind of, I think, why I received the email. But the email did come from a colleague. A colleague said, "Here's a committee. They're looking for people who are interested in joining. Are you interested?"
Yeah.
But I am interested.
So it doesn't take, it does take something, but just to get the word out is really huge, and that's how it is with anything. If you're looking for a job, whatever it is, you just have to, but sometimes it's that first step in just saying, where do I even begin? I'm not part of a community. So I really appreciate you sharing that because I personally am always really wanting to know too, is how everyone says, just go get involved. It's like, I don't know how to, but
that's right.
Yeah.
And may I add one other thing? I think a concept from Buddhism for me was helpful. The beginner's mind.
Yeah.
Because as I entered into this work, I really didn't know a lot about nonprofits. I certainly didn't know about, a lot about wildlife legislation.
Yeah.
And I had to spend a considerable amount of time learning about those things and learning from other people. And learning about the laws from other experts. And so having that beginner's mind, I think, is really critical to any kind of success.
And I don't know if you said it in this conversation before, or if I read you somewhere where you said that curiosity was sort of the spark for you at the beginning. And that's what it is, because once you, for me, it was with the Middle East, and I ended up writing a book about the Middle East, and that led to my working at DU for 10 years, which led to me starting a nonprofit, but it was a curiosity I had at the very beginning. This I don't know anything about any of this, except for some specific thing I'd been, family I'd met, but it was small. And then, but if something grabs you, it's like, I listen to that, right? Because it's telling you, you might want to check this out. And I'm sure it's really enriched your own life being a part of all of this, as well as what you've done for, the movement as well, if we'll call it a movement. Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely changed my life.
Yeah. And I would assume in a good way. Sometimes people say about how we change the world. It's like, in what way? It's like, I guess I forgot to add that in the title. I was hoping it was assumed, or intimated. So you got this PhD in religion, ethics, and philosophy, and I'm wondering though if we can just back up on two issues. One, what drew you to that? Like, what was is it just your nature, that would make you think that way? And then also I wanted you to talk about where your love for animals came from, because it's just part of your overall love, but I'm just curious about those two things, and sorry to put them into one question, but I didn't want to forget. So I'll make you forget.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, thanks for the question. So I grew up in a very religiously devout family, and there are some very positive things that come out of being raised in that. Sorry,
do you mind talking about what faith?
No, it was a Baptist.
Oh, really? Okay.
And yes, so very, very, at the time it would have been called Fundamentalist Baptist Church. And so there's some positive things that I think are benefits that come from growing up in that environment. I think one is, at a relatively young age, you're exposed to what, is what I think of as big questions in life.
Right.
Big questions about the meaning of life, the purpose of your life, why are we here, those kinds of things. I think another benefit is an emphasis on ethics. Like you're taught from a very young age to think about, how you ought to live your life ethically, and it's the basic stuff about being honest and loving one's neighbor. Yeah. Right. That foundation, right?
Yeah.
And then I also think there's a sense in which I think religious traditions at their best teach people or open people up to transcendence, right? And there are different ways that people conceptualize transcendence, but I like to think about it as it opened me up to understanding that my life, that the world and the universe was bigger than just me and my life, right? So a sort of notion that this isn't just about me, that life isn't just about me.
Yeah.
And it isn't even just about my particular community. Life is much bigger than any of that.
Yeah.
And so it taught me that. And I will say that while I deeply appreciated those teachings, I also chafed against the rigidity of the environment I grew up in. And you mentioned this already with curiosity. I always had a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And was always asking questions.
Yeah.
And in the environment that I grew up in that fundamentalist environment, I didn't get satisfactory answers.
Yeah.
and so I think what when it came to thinking about, how I wanted to spend my time, in college and university, I started at a business major. That wasn't satisfying. And I sort of morphed into, or the path morphed into the religion, ethics, and philosophy. But the bottom line is, I think that growing up in that environment, I was very curious, but I was also pretty psychologically constricted.
Yeah.
So I wanted to branch out, but I had a lot of anxiety about whether this was the right thing to do. So I think it felt safer for me to pursue the academic questions, and that's the path I went on. Yeah, right, because it was. I think I also had kind of a philosophical mindset, but it allowed me to approach the questions, learn about very diverse perspectives within a very de-escalated environment. Right? It allowed me to engage very deep ideas and to dig deep, to think critically about their arguments, right? And then think about where I stood in respect to those things. And so in essence, it allowed me to work through my own stuff with religion. Yeah. And I was able to broaden my perspective. I was able to, in a sense, come to navigate my own journey on a much different trajectory than I started out on.
When you started your studies, you mean? So from when you started your PhD to when you came out, changed everything?
That's right. Yes, changed everything for me. And even, it changed everything for me. Because of the level of academic rigor that you have to go through. Sure. I'm not sure it works this way for everybody, but for me, I took their ideas very seriously. And even what I came away with is that even if I don't necessarily agree with this religious philosophy or even necessarily with this religion, there is deep, deep wisdom in these religious traditions.
To be mind unbelievable.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
I
there
have a lot
is.
to learn. That's right. And these religious traditions have a lot to learn from each other. So I came away with a profound appreciation for that. And like I said, it opened me up. It opened up my thinking. It opened up my way of life and really opened doors for me in terms of thinking about what I could do. And when you grow up in very narrow environments, there are certain things women are supposed to do, they're not supposed to do. Certain, you're at least for me, I always grew up with a sense of, doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And it isn't that I've lost that focus,
yeah,
but it's that I have a kind of freedom about it. And I understand that doing the right thing can be understood in different ways.
Yeah,
Does that
and
make sense?
enjoyed, and yes, because
That's
when you're
right.
choosing it, it's like, why this feels good to go help this donkey, keep his skin. I mean, to be quite literal, it feels good. You're not doing it because it's the right thing to do, and that's the difference sometimes between religion and philosophy, or religion and just having, you can have it within the context of religion, but if it's an open forum discussion. And I will say, I think Judaism is very strong in that, because it is one of those ancient religions that really it's all about, no one agrees on any of it, and it's all about discussion of every little aspect of life, right. and everybody weighs in on it, and I do think that you get incredible wisdom about life that isn't even necessarily about God and religion and, so forth. It's just the bigger issues of life. And I think they all tend to do that. I wish I had known you. I guess I did know you for part of it, but I didn't know that you had this side to you, because I used to take students who were Jewish, Muslim, Christian, and then eventually everyone, and work with them for a year to learn each other's religion. And then we'd take them to the Middle East, and then they could work with kids in their religions there too. And it was so I found such depth because I myself then had to really go deep into Islam and Judaism and Christianity, as we had speakers and texts and so forth. And yeah, it's the most fascinating for people who may hate religion, just reading those texts and seeing how people come at it from different perspectives is just, it informs us today. We couldn't need it more. When I think about someone and your era, that when you went to school is quite close to mine, thinking about religion being important, I don't know that I would have seen it that way then. Like I didn't. I thought of religion, even though I grew up very Catholic, probably a total of 11 years, including some college, in a Catholic school. That very much informed my thing. And I'd had enough at that point. And I can't imagine, I love how you did it and how you chose to go, really make a study of it. And because it's fascinating. And it's, and actually that really does segue well into our next subject, because, as I mentioned earlier to you, I think that I heard a discussion that you had through ANAW, gotta get it right, about the impact of philosophy and religion on the environment and on the treatment of animals. And it's such a necessary lens to bring to the understanding of this. Because, and you can kind of see, if anyone who's been following either of these sort of efforts to protect animals or protect the environment, you can see how it's morphing into other areas like art. I've had a couple of people on who talk about the connection of understanding the grief of the environmental, implosion, I guess, I hate that for lack of a better word, through art. How do you experience it? How do you express your feelings about how you're feeling about that? And also, how do you teach other people about it? And I think religion and philosophy is another element that we can use, or other tools we can use to mine that sort of. So, and I don't want to repeat the conversation that you'd had earlier that was so insightful, but I would like to put a link on it so that people can go listen. It was a very deep and rich conversation between yourself and I think the chair of ANAW, the main ANAW, I don't know what to call it, from Central in Africa.
Please. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. And one of the things that they'd asked the person asking the questions, moderator, was asking, can you think of some examples where you've seen religion be she didn't use these words at all, but maybe an impediment to the health of animals or the environment? That ways people were following their religion and it had a negative impact. And I'm wondering if you remember, what you're thinking about that.
Sure. I don't remember what I was.
Other examples, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
I don't remember.
You were talking, I know one thing is the misvaluing of ancient texts, like in Genesis, when they're talking about different ways that it's presented.
That's right. Yeah. So when you look at those early texts in Genesis where it talks about human beings have dominion over the earth.
Yeah.
Right. The dominion, and if you read Pope Francis, he's very clear about this, and it's not limited to Catholicism.
No.
But he says it doesn't mean domination, right? Dominion, if you look at it, actually means caring for, and so it's not an idea about dominating. Mm-hmm. It's about an idea of caring for the earth. And if you've ever tended a garden, you know that you don't have dominion. You don't dominate a garden.
You can want to have it all you love,
right?
All day long. Yeah,
exactly. It doesn't work. And so I think what the helpful idea, then there are many, many helpful ideas in Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, but one thing that he talks about, and we've talked about in a presentation that I recently did, and people come at this in different ways, but I think what you get in that encyclical, the letter that he wrote, is a responsible anthropocentrism, and not an excessive anthropocentrism, which is a sense in which, when you read Pope Francis, he does believe that the earth was created for humans to use, and even non-human animals. But here's the key for him: he doesn't believe it was simply created for them, for humans, right?
Or only.
So that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. Not merely it's they weren't merely created for us and for our use, which cuts out exploitation. Now, there's a larger philosophical debate that I want to point to, where some people are they're biocentrists, they're not anthropocentric, or they're ecocentric. Biocentric would mean that there's a kind of hierarchy of being in which anyone who's a biological being is kind of at the top of the hierarchy. Ecocentrism is this kind of notion of people, planet, non-human animals all equal. Anthropocentrism puts people at the top.
Right.
But for someone, I think, at least as I read Pope Francis, what I hear him saying is, yes, anthropocentrism, but really, really qualified, with responsibilities and obligations toward the environment. Other people, especially the marginalized, who are going to be affected most, or at least first, by climate change, and non-human animals.
So he does also mention non-human
absolutely
animals. Okay,
and absolutely talks. Yeah. Not just the environment. He absolutely talks about the preservation of biodiversity, and for him, the call from God to do so. He says we have no right. We have no right to allow or to cause species to go extinct.
Yeah.
Right? We should be about protecting them.
I'm really happy to hear that, and I'm curious as to whether that what year did that come out? Do you know? I'm like, has it been a decade or so? It's been a while, hasn't it?
It's been a while, and in fact, the second one just now wrote a follow-up, and I haven't read it yet. But he just now wrote a follow-up, which I believe is the first time a pope has ever written a follow-up to his own encyclical. So I haven't read it yet, but it does speak to how important he thinks this issue is, of caring for the environment. And he recognizes an integral ecology. He recognizes our interrelation, right? People, planet, non-human animals, we are interconnected, and he strongly recognizes that in Laudato Si.
I wonder if he and Thich Nhat Hanh ever had a conversation.
I don't think they did, but it would have been interesting. Maybe they did. I don't know of it.
I mean, is that is his I don't know if he would go so far as to say interbeing. I don't know if the Pope would go that far, but it's the same. Sounds like the same message. We are all responsible and part of one another, and
I think they're parallel ideas, right? I don't necessarily. I think there are differences, but I think at the same time, to the degree that interbeing recognizes interconnection and interdependence, there's a connection with what at least what I believe Pope Francis is teaching.
Well, I hope that is actually. Can't wait to find that his newest one and read that, and I just really hope it's being shared, which it probably is with the churches around the world, because it's that kind of leadership we really need. No matter whether we're talking, because some people will only listen to that, and other people won't listen to that at all, but they will get it from perhaps another more philosophical or just a pragmatic sense. We're hurting ourselves if you have no faith, you have no philosophy, you have no belief in anything other than yourself. Even if you're self-focused, there's an interest in preserving both animals and the planet. Yes. So there's really, it's a confusing conundrum why so many people can't see it, despite the fact that it's right in front of us. I can only think that greed is blinding, because some of it isn't greed, some of it is survival. So you think about someone like the Inuit of indigenous people, say of the Arctic. I know in northern Canada this is the case where they are still allowed to hunt whales, for example, and for cultural reasons, not for survival reasons, but for cultural reasons, which is another thing we didn't talk about yet. But it also is a huge factor on how well we care for animals and the environment. Because if that is your culture to hunt whales or to hunt any dolphins in Japan, if you want to go that far. How do we deal with that? And I think you spoke to that somewhere really beautifully as well, like that, and understanding that we have to acknowledge the reality that people are making their living this way. People are, even if it's something that is harming the existence of animals' welfare or existence, there has to be a accommodation and a sensitivity to people's survival. This is how they know how to survive.
That's right. Again, you can't protect a species or an animal without taking people into account. Yeah. And if there is a desire, and I also think it's very important that these initiatives, any kind of initiative, is place-based, community supported, and community desired, right? And sometimes that desire can take place through dialogue, but I don't think it's something that can be imposed. I think it's something that the community has to come to, and then solutions can be worked out. And sometimes they come up with solutions often on their own.
Sure. Until you think about something, you don't think about it, so once you realize, it's like people cutting down a lot of African countries where they've cut down the, not the banyan trees. What are the trees that protect the shoreline? I can't believe I forget. I know the word so well, but I can't think exactly what they're called. But they're protecting against erosion, and they're planted all along shorelines. They're naturally, and people go and even though they're already suffering so many effects of climate change, they're cutting these trees down to use the firewood, or even though they have stoves, because that's what they need. It's so much of it is habit, and so people are also, once they learn that they're harming themselves, well, of course they're going to stop doing that. But you have to learn, and there's a big education to do pretty quickly. Another thing that you mentioned, I think that Pope Francis was talking about, or maybe this is just the philosophy of the Catholic Church, is that I guess I should know this, that man was formed, humankind, but they said in those days just man, was formed from from dust, that we are dust. And they even do that, we come from dust, to dust we shall return, which really is so similar to how indigenous people think, that we are the earth, like we are the water, and people always think it's symbolic. And they're not speaking symbolically, they're speaking literally, but that's when you are something, you can't harm it in any kind of a logical premise. So
without harming yourself,
without harming yourself, and your children and your
So
you and
even though
yours.
that's right. So even though a lot of religious traditions would recognize the materiality of our being, they might also believe that there's a soul or an immaterial part, but that doesn't negate the material aspect of our being, and it doesn't change anything you just said.
Can you
we
say
harm
more
the
about
earth,
that? Because I'm not sure I even understand what that means exactly, the materiality. I mean, I know the phrase, but...
Sure. Just that we are made from, like you just mentioned.
Oh.
In the Bible, it's dust, but we know that we are comprised of, atoms and cells. And if you read a book like The Journey of the Universe, which is a book that discusses the evolution of human beings, we're stardust, right? We are material beings. So one can hold to a philosophy which says, people are more than material beings, but we're not less than. Right? We are always material beings, at least, in religious philosophy, human beings are material beings. Now, again, there may be some afterlife. What people believe about those things, that's fine. If that's different than what I'm referring to. But we don't get away from that. And sometimes I think religious traditions, people focus about the afterlife or their immateriality, their soulishness, or their soul to the exclusion of the material world. And that's a danger, I think.
I think that's the whole, that feels, at least in Christianity, that is what it is. This is not important. What's important is what's next. And that might be the crux of the issue, actually.
Well, and that's exactly what Pope Francis is saying is not the case.
Which is so interesting, because he's really, and I wanted to ask you about this, because if let's just use the Christian belief, and I know that others believe it as well, especially monotheistic religions, believe that we are, we are created by God, like that maybe we don't believe in that we're stardust, but maybe we believe that there is a creator who made Adam and Eve. But that same person says we are dust. So they're agreeing in a sense that there is this materiality, whether God created humans full formed, ready to go, or whether we came from stardust, which, and by the way, I'm going to put a link to that video or that show as well about Brian Swim, about how we evolved, because that really informs this conversation too. And I think it's one of the best things I've ever seen. It's a PBS series, but you can get it different places, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating way to add in a dimension to this conversation.
But that's a great point that you just made.
Yeah,
it's in the text. It's in the ancient sacred text, right? It's there.
That we come from dust.
That's right.
Yeah.
And to dust you return.
Yeah. So that is the Islam also, I think, believes. Because these texts are built on one another. So Christian Judeo is well known that Christians are based on Jewish texts, but then Islam is also based and believes so many things that the other monotheistic religions do too.
And I have to insert this. There are different beliefs about the soul within those traditions. So I don't really want to necessarily get into it, but we have to recognize there are different ideas about the soul.
About who is God, and there's as many things that separate them as we can see day to day, and it's its ugly glory at this point. I'm wanting to ask you about this trip coming up, and if that's something that you're going on. This is wait, so this is not in Kenya.
It's not in Kenya, but
okay.
Yes, it goes into Tanzania. So this is a veterinary service trip.
Okay.
And essentially,
and this is through ANAW
USA. And so
USA. Okay.
we're leading this. We're leading this effort. Essentially, we're just taking vets, and it's the same thing I mentioned earlier. We're taking veterinarians, and one of our board members, Dr. Julia, is going to lead this service trip, and they'll be going in doing vaccinations, flea and tick, medications. They'll be deworming. Again, it's for dogs, cats, and donkeys, and providing any other medical services that they can. So they kind of travel around to different communities, and they offer these services for free. And it's a way of helping people care for their animals and their communities. And also, it's a way to help them deal with strays because there's a certain fear around strays because of rabies, and rightly so. And so it's a way of helping to address that problem.
Is it open only to veterinary or veterinary assistants, or who is this open to? Because it's a trip this spring, right? 2024?
That's right. Yeah. It's mostly vets and veterinarian assistants, but it's really anybody who wants to come and do the work, and it is a lot of work.
Is it? And
yes.
And is it 2 countries then? And
I believe it's just in Tanzania. Yeah. This one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this one's just in Tanzania. Yeah.
Okay. So then, so if you were to, and I'll put a link to that on the website as well. If you're looking, I don't know if you're looking for people. I've seen it on your site, so I thought perhaps you were. I'm sure the more the merrier, right? Because you do pay your own way. I think it's around $3,600, but
that's right.
It's food and lodging and everything. Is that transportation? Do you pay your own way in addition to that?
You do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to have the means to do it and the skill to do it, and certainly most important, the interest. Well, most important probably the means, but the interest to do it. Yeah. I think that could be really interesting for a lot of different people. I think, at least we'll put it on there and
thank you.
Run it up the flag and see who salutes, as they say. I guess I had just one or two more last quick questions while we still have a minute. You did so much work at Regis that we didn't talk about, and I really, let me just touch on one thing here, which is this environmental studies, I think it's a master's degree. Can you talk about that a little bit? And is that a new program?
Relatively new. It's a Master of Arts specialization in environmental studies.
Okay.
And that was, I think that I took a sort of two-pronged approach to my concern about the environment, and one of them was to involve myself in nonprofit work, and the other one was to think about whether or not there was a pathway for me to morph the work that I was doing in academics. And what I found is that there is, and that's known as the environmental humanities, and it's a relatively new field of inquiry, but it says this: philosophy and religion, and there are other disciplines within the humanities, but my focus, philosophy and religion, are disciplines that have a repository of ideas that we can draw on to help us address environmental problems. And so that's really what I set out to do, was to think about, and in philosophy, it's pretty well known how philosophy, environmental ethics, that's more well known. I think it's less well known how religion can be a resource, although I think that field has been and is growing. But that's what I attempted to do. And what I ended up doing at the end was working with faculty in communications and psychology and philosophy and different religious traditions. And we crafted an interdisciplinary MA specialization, and it has a communication focus. And so that our graduates are able to go out and talk about and address these issues, perhaps in the nonprofit world or other sectors. We hope to add different emphases to that environmental studies program, but that's what we're working on right now. We're actually talking to different people across the university, different faculty and programs and things like that. But that's what we do.
So, and when did that program start?
It really started a little before COVID, but didn't get launched until after COVID. Yeah. Because everything kind of came to a screeching halt during COVID, as we know.
Every person I've talked to, before, everyone has to stop and explain this big lag in development of everything and how their lives completely switched gears. It's just, it's remarkable. We're still seeing how big of an impact it was. But, well, that's exciting. I'm thrilled to hear that Regis is offering that. And in that context too, and in communications, which has been the problem, but informed communication, communication based on a deep understanding. So,
Yes.
right, that's a fantastic. That might be your
Thank
legacy. I mean,
you.
because that when you can start sharing that and passing it on to other people to share, the ripple effect is real.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
And there's a
let
lot of
me just
people involved in it, so kudos
of
to them.
course, but
Deep
you
appreciation.
have
Yeah.
to, yeah, and I want to allow that for them and let them hear that, because I'm sure you do have deep appreciation. I just also want to say that somebody has to start it and make it happen,
Yeah. Thank you.
and
Thank you.
that's critically important, and it's not everybody who can do those things. So if you are a person who can do those things, can start something, I think it's even more incumbent on one to do so. And I guess just the last question would be about looking forward. Are you continuing on this really tailored for you and for the world path you're on? I mean, because you've kind of settled into this really thing that couldn't be you more, right? Would you say?
Yes, I would. I mean, you asked me a question earlier. I want to say one thing. There's a quote that's attributed to Saint Ignatius. I don't think he actually said it. He's the founder of the Jesuits.
Oh,
Go out and set the world on fire.
oh,
So that's a philosophy that I deeply ascribe to. Whatever that means for you, in whatever way you can do it, go out and set the world on fire. Right? I mean, add your light to the
yeah.
situation, and help. Be the person who helps. But you asked me earlier, and I didn't
Love
answer the
that.
question
Love
about
that.
about where my love for animals came from, and I
Yeah.
want to
Thank you for
quickly
bringing
say,
that back.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I think part of it came, and this, if people link out to that other podcast, I'll talk about it. Part of it was just me. I was the
Yeah.
kid who wanted to play with the stuffed animals, not necessarily the dolls, right? But
Right.
I think some of that came from my dad, who was a person who wasn't trained in medicine or anything like that, but he helped wild animals. Like if a bird had broken a wing, and he helped reset it and released it. So I saw some of that in him, and
That's
so what I
huge.
it is, and
It
it's a
is.
wonderful legacy from him
Yeah.
that he would stop and do that. He once brought a rabbit home that had been blinded. He saw people throwing rocks at a rabbit, and they blinded the rabbit in one eye, and he came home and he brought it home and helped to heal it. But I guess what I hope is that I'm working on an edited volume on religion and endangered animals, entailed
Really?
animals.
Huh.
I am, and I'm also working on a couple different articles, but one is on regenerative virtues. And I'm working on that with two other colleagues. We've done two presentations on it now. But it's about cultivating regenerative habits, and regenerative ideas are derived from design. But
Mm-hmm.
it's this notion of regenerative design. It's design that it's not simply sustainable, but it creates co-thriving, right,
Mm-hmm.
between
Mm-hmm.
whatever's being designed and the environment and the people. And so regenerative virtues are, how do we help cultivate habits in people so that they live a regenerative lifestyle, so that their very being is regenerative? And that's a paper and project that I'm working on. So those are kind of my writing goals right now, and things that I'm really focused on. And then also thinking about how to expand our environmental studies program, because we have a couple of offers from nonprofits. They would like to bring our students, to different parts of the world,
Really?
to do internships and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to figure out how to make that happen. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's all. I'm so glad you added those in, because they're all really interesting. And I feel like that paper could easily be a book. maybe it's going to be, I don't know how long a paper is going to be,
It's a
but,
long paper so far.
yeah, but there's so much there, I mean, because it's, I don't know if you've read Paul Hawken's book on regeneration, but I mean,
Yeah.
when you see how much, as he always calls it, the cascading events that come, the cascading benefits that come from living a sustainable, regenerative world, creating one, it's
Yes.
just everybody wins, everybody
right.
wins, and
Love
there's no argument against it. There's only good to be had there.
Right.
Even if money's your only goal, there's even money to be had there. So we just have to look at new ways of being in the world. And boy, are you contributing to helping us look at it. And I appreciate that. Thank you so much for everything that you do. It's heartwarming, and it energizes me, and I think it will energize others as well, to know that you can just devote your entire life to just making the world better. And that's what you've done. and it served you as well, right? You're saying your life has been rich, and
it's unimaginable to me now. Even when I think about my journey into a PhD, I didn't envision ending up here.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful. Yeah. And thank you for the opportunity to talk with you, and thank you for this podcast.
Thank you so much.
Putting these ideas out in the world.
Yeah. Everybody, keep sending them out. Yeah, we'll get there. All right, Janet, thank you so much. Have a lovely holiday season, and might follow you up a little faster than 10 years this time.
Right. That would be wonderful, and same to you. I hope you have a wonderful holiday as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.